Yeah, this is a Pianki calling from the Midwest. How you tonight?
Peace. Greetings, brother. You said Pianki?
Yes, sir.
Greetings, brother.
Yeah, I had asked that question. I guess you had talked about the subject earlier. I was wondering what's the status on the payout, and what can people like ourselves do in order to speed things up or help this come to fruition.
Are you talking about the big payout from the class action case?
Yes, sir.
Well, being that we are looking for the money from the government, that's who we need to be screaming on. But there is not enough, and I used the term outcry earlier in the interview. There are just not enough of us crying out. And let me just once again perspective. Now we're talking about $1.25 billion for the discrimination against black farmers, right? Mm-hmm. Now you have to be mindful now, there's another class action case against the USDA by the Native Americans. And theirs is almost $3.5 billion for non-payment of land leases that they're suing the USDA for. So, we already know just from the history books, what they did to, our Native American family. Mm-hmm. So, the money is there. We know the money is there. But they're playing games. They're shuffling around. They come up with all kinds of reasons. And then when you hear something like, particularly those who are really not in the know, they'll hear that, President Obama signed off on this $1.25 billion, a few months ago, but it still had to go to the Senate and to the House. They had for their approval. And then, they'll drag it along, and then next thing you know, folks are going on vacation. It's just stuff, man. And it'll be a long time before the money is actually paid out. And you have to also, one other thing is that even when the money is paid, now check this out, the $50,000 or whatever it is that the farmer is going to be awarded, that money is taxed. First of all, in this particular case, the pick for two, the lawyers are going to be paid out of the settlement. Right? That's the first thing. Secondly, the monies will be taxed on the state level, and some of it may possibly be taxed on the federal level.
Well, Jewish Holocaust payments are tax-free on the federal level and tax-free on many states. Not only the money that's paid to the ones who actually experience, but also their relatives.
That's right. That's right.
And guess this, even benefactor. Benefactor means that I'm about to die, and I'm going to say I want you, who may not even be related to me, to receive, any future payments. So blacks are coming out in mass voting for these Democrats and not putting in demands or stipulations in exchange for their votes. This should be one of the top, priorities, because we're talking about a transfer of wealth. A lot of this other feel-good and emotional stuff that we get involved in, I think is, irrelevant. The whole idea about building wealth, and this is exactly what, black farmers need. And then look at the implications of the fact that a crime was committed, someone was found guilty, and the court said they must pay.
That's right. So now the question remains, what are we going to do?
Well, there should be a massive outcry on it. That march that they had in Washington, D.C. today should have been about black farmers getting paid.
They ain't say nothing about no food down there yesterday.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a foolish mess with Glenn Beck. I got another question, too. Have any black farmers looked seriously into doing farming in some of those West African countries where the land is free? I know myself personally of, 2 areas where in one area they have close to 30,000 acres that was given to slave descendants. This is right next to the Volta River where you have freshwater lake, and in Zimbabwe, they got farms there that, for the taking. So have any black farmers looked into that very seriously? And if I myself was interested in farming, what would be the best way that I could be, I guess you can say, schooled on acquiring the equipment, the tractors or whatever it is that's needed?
There have been several, and I know several farmers personally that have made journeys to a few African countries, and not even on their own dime. They were brought over, taken over, whatever, to do a feasibility study, if you will. But once again, when you start talking about import-export, we have to have our own folks handling those kinds of things. You talked about the equipment. Equipment is easy to get if you have the money. Tractors and if you talk about 30,000 acres, now you're talking about combines. They run upwards of $300,000 a piece. And forget about the technical aspect of it. It's like you still need a workforce. Even with modern day equipment, you still have to have a team of folks that know how to run those machines, although most of it is computerized and whatnot. But when you look at the big picture, at what point am I going to leave my farm, struggling here in the United States, and my own government won't help me, to go over to Africa to grow food with no guarantee that food is even going to make it back to the United States?
Well, there's been some trade legislation that has been put in place that makes it easy for those produced products to get back in the United States.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but I'm just talking about like the established farmer. So it becomes like this whole educational process now, where we have young, eager people who are willing to do farming because they're becoming more educated. Farm is no longer a dirty four-letter word, if you will. And so there are other areas where the ones from academia can get into agriculture and make a lot of money because they have the brain power to assist and answer those very questions that you have. But it's a learning curve too. And then when you look at it, if I may just give you like a quick example, right? A bushel of wheat weighs about close to 60 pounds. Let's say about 55 to 60 pounds, right? The average farmer today gets about $2, and that's on the high end, per pound, right? $2. So let's just round it up, make the numbers even. So a bushel of wheat weighs 60 pounds. They get $120 for that bushel of wheat, right? That's him, all the work that he did to plant that seed, harvest that crop. The bushel can produce upwards of about 40 loaves of bread. Now, how much do we pay for a loaf of bread in the store? So the farmer's not seeing the added value or the benefits from the added value of that wheat being turned into the bread, the loaf of bread that can sell upwards of, I've seen bread for $4 a loaf. $2 easy. And you multiply that by 40 loaves. So, and that's just like one example. So when somebody looks at farming, they're like, I'm not going to be farming. I'm not making any money. And that's what the actual farmer is saying to this day, but even on a larger scale relative to all other crops. So we do have to continue to educate folks and let them know that there is benefit in this. And if, at the very least, we're allowed to feed ourselves, because, that now takes us into a whole other area of conversation, when we start talking about genetically modified foods and who actually owns the seeds of the world.
I had read someplace, too, where there was an article talking about black farmers was looking at going into the producing of organic food, saying that the market is much livelier. Is that true?
When you say lively, what do you mean? Lively meaning that the food is better for us, economically profitable?
Yeah, more profitable.
Oh, yeah, for sure. If you're able to get your product labeled organic, and you have to understand, once again, perspective, what does organic mean? And so for all intents and purposes relative to agriculture, it is an indicator that the food is not genetically modified, first and foremost. No pesticides were used on the product, on the end product, or actually in the growth of that particular fruit or vegetable. So that's organic, relative to the marketing of food. And you have these agencies now that are the organic certifiers, So it's like, okay, you have some land and you want to grow organic, but you still have to get approval.
Wow.
So, so that's just the way it is until we set up our own. And that's it, until we set up our own, whether it be our own grocery stores, our own communities, where we are sustaining our own selves and feeding our own selves.
Okay, that sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the answer to the question.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You going to stick with us, fam? Okay. All right. It's just so funny. Like, as I was listening to y'all talk, just how the world is just turned upside down. You figure that the norm would be natural food, that would be the norm. But you have to have a special category for food that's actually grown naturally. That is crazy to me.
That's only because somebody that has some authority thought of it. And so, with that being said, at what point does our blind submission to authority cease? When do we come out of our comfort of ignorance, if you will?
Exactly. Did you hear? You might have heard about this, but the feds raided the Amish because they were selling raw milk.
Brother, that is one story. You know how they say there's 8 million stories in the city of New York? That is only one story. And if they're doing it to their own, imagine what they're doing to us. And this is what I'm saying, as I was, talking earlier on about some of the things, if you will, that has happened to our farmers. Just imagine in rural America, then backwoods, you got some farm service agency, that's in some small building, and you as an elder, because the average age of a black farmer nowadays is like 68 years old. And this is 2010. So imagine they was going back and trying to get a loan in the 19 whatever. Nigga, get out of here. Period.
You know what? I want to give you a hypothetical. Let's just say that, we get Steven Spielberg and James Cameron together. Let's just create a scenario where we get rid of the pioneers and the path marks in our neighborhood and whatever, and we try to farmers and the urban city dwellers. So
you have to have a lot of the front-line soldiers that would be willing to die first, because it will be a fight. And those who are left with the knowledge to make that idea come to fruition will have to be set up and protected to make it happen. And once again, we can label that as outcry.
So the primary aggressors against this would be the feds.
Yeah, is it legal now to actually they're trying to make it illegal to grow your own food. There are bills on the floor as we speak that are saying that they do not want, and they are making it illegal for you to have a garden in your backyard.
Right. That's where they're all going.
There have been farmers that have been raided, if you will, and their equipment taken away because they have processing machines where they can separate, let's say, for instance, the wheat germ from the wheat or whatever it might be, or, just separators, take the seeds and debris from your product. So if you harvest your product and you don't have the equipment, you need to take it somewhere to have it cleaned, whether it be wheat or what have you. So a lot of those individual, independent processors, they've been jailed, threatened, to the degree that they said, it's not worth it for me to go to jail, and they just leave it alone.
Wow. Well, I'm dropping the link for the BFAA in the chat room, and specifically the link on Pickford versus Glickman, so people can get the backstory on that. But I want to bring in one last caller for you.
Yes, sir.
Last four digits, 6024. What's your name? Where you calling from?
Peace. Luminous Pass, Bay Area, California. What's going on?
Peace, family.
Greetings, brother.
Hey. What I was wondering about is earlier you mentioned that if you were making over $1,000 on your farm or, in your backyard based on crops, that the government defines that as a farm. And I was wondering if that gives them authority or jurisdiction to come in and start, calling shots. And if that's the case, I remember there's a major problem about, making like raw almonds or, producing raw almonds or raw nuts of any kind because they had to be pasteurized. And if you pasteurize the almonds, it takes all the nutritional. So is what you're saying about the $1,000 thing, does that give the government authority to come in and tell you what to do, or how does that work?
If I may answer your question relative to the authority of the feds, if you will, or government, and it may make you laugh. There was a time where Pluto was a planet. Am I correct?
Right, exactly.
Okay? Do I need to say anything else?
Exactly.
Pluto is no longer a planet, brother. And that's because we woke up one morning and it was in the newspapers or either on the television because somebody, some scientist, some group that was affiliated with our government said, you know what, Pluto is no longer a planet. They do what they want to do, but more importantly, they do what we are allowing them to do to us.